video going here, the recording. There we go. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Kari Quaas. I am with the Conservation District, and we are going to be talking today about rainwater catchment. So Derek's our engineer at the district, and then Sara is also on our team for community outreach. So between the two of us, we are going to manage the chat and try to answer all your questions. And by all means, if you have very specific to your property questions, we'll hold those for the end, but we'll try and do our best to get through. So thanks for being here. Just 4 questions again. The chat is what we have. At the end, we'll probably be able to have you do your raised hand so that way you can ask questions live, because sometimes it's easier just to say it as opposed to write it. During the presentation, please keep your lines muted. That's just helpful for everyone to have clarity. Little bit about a conservation district. So the 3 of us work for Snohomish Conservation District. We're one of 45 in the state. We're a sub-agent of the state. We're a specialized district. We are here to protect the natural resources, water, soil, and all of that. We started working with agricultural folks, and now it's moved more urban. So the rain garden concept's kind of interesting because it started in the city, but it does work really well on farms too. So we'd love to talk with you. If you have any questions, we'll come out to your property, and we love to educate and see what folks are doing. 2 things I wanted to point out in terms of events. We have moved most of our stuff virtually. So if you go to our events calendar on the website, snohomishcd.org/events, you'll find all kinds of things. Next Wednesday, we're doing a discussion on trees. This is tied to climate change, and we hope to encourage discussion. So we have some information, but the idea behind it is really to engage and hear what you're doing where you are. And then our plant sale pre-orders are still open until the 10th of February. Many things have sold out, I'll be honest, but there's still some great stuff available. So check that out too. And then I wanted to acknowledge our partners for this one. We have WSU. My goodness, they've done a lot of work to get this Country Living Expo together. So I'm very pleased to be working with them. We partner with them on a bunch of stuff. So that's all I have. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Derek.
Thank you. Find the share. Where's my mouse? All right, everybody see that?
Yes.
That's showing up. Okay. Now it's like you're okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I am an engineer with the Snohomish Conservation District. I've been with the Snohomish Conservation District for 10 years. I mostly focus on stormwater. So figuring out what to do with water after it comes out of the sky and then hits your property. I do want to put my own plug in for the conservation districts. If you are in Snohomish County or on Camino Island, that means the Snohomish Conservation District is available for you. Camino is kind of weird like that, but they're part of our district. If you are outside of that, we won't be able to provide quite as much help as terms of like direct site visits or doing plans or that type of thing, but each county does have its own conservation district. The services are fairly varied at conservation districts. Not everybody has the full suite of services that we do, and some of them have different services other than what we have. But I would highly recommend, if you're not in Snohomish County, that you reach out to your own conservation district and see what services they have available. If you are in Snohomish Conservation District and you want to put in some kind of larger cistern or some type of system to collect stormwater, and you think you have a good application, send me an email. My address is down here, and we'll get you on a list, and I can actually come out to your property, walk around, explain how we would do everything. If it's really extensive and you need a lot of help, I can help draw up a plan for you. While we're out there, we can talk about other things like rain gardens or native planting or just drainage in general if you're having drainage issues. It's a service that's already covered under an existing tax assessment. It's a rates and charges tax assessment. So what that means is you've already paid for it through your property taxes. So you might as well take advantage of it. So it doesn't cost you anything more than what you pay in taxes for me to come out to your property and look around and help drainage problems. right now is a really busy time of year for me because we got hit really, really hard by a lot of rain all of a sudden. And so I've been doing lots of visits to people that are having drainage issues. Please feel free to ask questions as I go through this. I'd work better if it's kind of a back and forth instead of just a straight lecture. Yeah, don't feel like you're interrupting or anything if you ask questions. So let's just get into it. So the things that we're mostly going to be talking about are the three different types of, most common types of rainwater harvesting systems. And there's cisterns and rain barrels and guzzlers. So first, let's talk about why would you want to save the rain? And everybody's kind of got their own reasons for it. From the conservation district, our ultimate goal is to protect our drinking water and freshwater habitats. We're thinking really large, 30,000 feet scale, trying to protect our environment, get us into a system that's more sustainable, and stormwater harvesting can do a lot of that. However, admittedly, most people are just trying to make their property work the best that they can, and they don't want to be using resources that they have to pay for. So alternatively, it can save you money. There is quite a bit, well, not quite a bit. There is some upfront cost to rainwater harvesting, but it's one of those things where it pays itself out over time. So you kind of have to figure out what your initial investment capacity is, and then go from there. But it definitely can save you money over time. It just takes a little while to pay off. One of the other better reasons to do stormwater harvesting is to put water in places where there isn't existing plumbing. This is most common for livestock. So that's what a guzzler is. We'll cover that in a bit. Is just an artificial roof that fills an existing cistern so that livestock can water when they're way out in the fields, and you don't want to bring a water line, a mile or two out to where the livestock are. But there's other reasons to do that. If you just, in general, if there's a spot that needs water and you don't want to do a whole bunch of plumbing to get water out there, stormwater harvesting is an easy way to do that. It can help reduce flooding and reduce runoff. Oftentimes, the way people's houses are configured, their downspout is discharging to a low spot or a spot that is right up against their foundation, so they end up with water in their crawl space or in their basement. And a rain barrel or a cistern is a way to collect some of that water, provide an overflow for anything that doesn't get collected, and get that water and protect that space so that you're not just constantly dumping water right at your foundation. Harvested rainwater is better for plants. It tends to have a lower pH, which plants like. As we learned in Flint, Michigan, if you have too low of a pH in your pipes, it will start to corrode the pipes. So one of the most important things in municipal water systems is to jack up the pH and make it basic, so that it doesn't corrode the pipes that the water is running through. However, the downside of that is that it's not what plants really like. Rainwater also doesn't have chlorine or fluoride or any of the other stuff that any of the other conditioning or treatments that they put in water. It also, in general, tends to have higher dissolved oxygen content, which the plants also. And then the last reason is if you're seriously considering being an off-the-grid person, this is one of the essential things that you have to have. So usually the two things that everybody has to have in order to be off the grid is electricity and water. And so this is one of those two. Any questions before we get into it, or should I just start? I saw some questions up here. Were those just comments? Just go forward. So first thing we're going to talk about is cisterns. Cisterns can be really, really fancy, as you see on the left, where somebody spent a good amount of money making it look really nice, or they can be really, really simple and just be a stock tank, like you see on the right. There are upsides and downsides to each of these models. Obviously, the one on the right is a lot cheaper. The one on the right is also a good example of potential problem areas, though. This is used for livestock, so it's not as big of an issue. But if you're going to have an open system like this, you have to keep in mind, one, that you may get mosquitoes in the system if it's just open and it's not a closed system. And the other is that this tank on the right lets in sunlight. And when you let sunlight into stored water, you're going to get an algae bloom. And that's just because there's enough nutrients in stormwater that algae does really well. So one of the things that we always do when we put in these systems is figure out a way to keep sunlight out of the water, because otherwise the whole thing just fills with algae. And you'll notice that with the rain barrels that we sell, we use recycled shipping barrels in order to do a rain barrel system. And we only use the blue ones. We never use the white ones because the white ones are semi-opaque and they let sunlight through. So you end up with algae blooms. When it comes to cisterns, usually the first thing people ask me is, can I put it underground? And yes, you definitely can put it underground. People like the idea of putting it underground because it's out of sight, out of mind. However, you should know that putting it underground usually increases the cost by 3 or 4 times. 1, because you have to actually dig a hole. 2, because it has to be done in a way that won't collapse on itself because of the weight of the soil around it. And then 3, because then you have to use a pump in order to get the water out. If you use an above ground system, you can use gravity to get water to the places that you need it to go. But if you have a below ground system, you pretty much always have to have a pump, and that adds significantly to the cost of the system.
Hey, Derek, there's one question, and I maybe we'll just address it right away, is somebody asked, from what I remember, we weren't allowed to have water catchment.
Oh, yeah.
Has
Yeah,
that
very
changed?
good.
What's the
Very
rule?
good. Yeah, so this always comes up. And I'm glad it come up again. It's come up every year that I've done this presentation. So technically, the water that falls out of the sky belongs to the state. And up until 2009, you actually needed a water rights permit in order to collect stormwater. That is no longer true as of 2009. Now, as of 2009, you are allowed to collect as much water as you want, as long as it doesn't significantly impede the function of the water system. So if you put in a system that collected 1 million gallons, you would probably get in trouble. But if you're putting in a system that's 5, 10, 15, even 20,000 gallons, that's not illegal. You may at some point get to the point where somebody starts to question it, but again, it's not illegal. And rain barrel is definitely not illegal. And in fact, more and more the state is encouraging people to collect, to start collecting rainwater because it does help, especially on the west side of the mountains, with the fact that we just have too much water. Was there some follow-up questions on that?
No,
that's Derek. Oh, sorry. I just sent the reference to Washington Department of Ecology.
Perfect. Thank you. That one always comes up. The other one that always comes up also is it safe to drink the water? We're going to get into that one later. This is an alternative to the plastic tanks that you usually see now, the PVC or the polyethylene tanks. These are called bladder tanks. And the upside of these is that they're very, very cheap to manufacture. In terms of volume, this is the cheapest way to do it. And all you really need is a big open space in order to put it in. This is a technology that came out a couple of years ago, and they've started to become more and more and more common. It's really only good for larger applications though. So really in the 20,000 plus gallon range is when it starts to pay off for you. But I always like to show this as an option because there may be some people with more agricultural needs that would consider a system like this. So that's cisterns. We'll get a little bit more into the details of that later, but that's just the basic idea. The cistern is just a great big tank. The other way to do things, which is more of a smaller scale thing, is to put in rain barrels. And we have our own rain barrel program at the district where we make the barrels and we sell them to you at cost. They're 50, are they 55 or 50? The cost has been creeping up a little bit. But dollars each. They're made out of HDPE plastic, which is really, really strong. I'm pretty convinced that I could fill one of these barrels full of water and drop it off a 2-story building and it would be fine because the material is so strong. And compared to what you would get at like Lowe's for $80 or $100, it's much stronger. They are barrels that have been used previously. They're all food grade barrels, however. So they've only had things in them that have been approved for human ingestion. They're used to ship things like uh, juice concentrate and that type of stuff all over the world. And we do a lot of work internally to make sure that we only get barrels that have had food products in them. If you go out and get your own barrels, you do need to ask some questions about what was stored into them prior to that. And they should have tags on the side when you get them that'll say what they were used for. One thing about stormwater harvesting is that it gets addicting. So most people start with one barrel and then they realize that 50 gallons really sounds like a lot in their head, but it really isn't very much. So they start adding and adding and adding. And then before you know it, you've got barrels all over the place. And that's usually when I know that somebody's ready to move to the next level of cisterns. We call rain barrels the gateway drug to rainwater harvesting. Because it kind of gives people the awareness of, oh my gosh, there is so much water coming off of my roof that's just being wasted. It's just washing downstream. And yet I'm paying the municipality to bring water into my house. And that first rain barrel really wakes people up to like, I should be saving way more of this resource than I am. So yeah, so it's not uncommon to start seeing people doing all kinds of crazy things. But usually at some point, they will go to a cistern, which is what I would encourage you to do if you really do have that much use for the water. The other thing, again, you'll notice here is these barrels are white, and I really do not recommend you use white barrels because they will fill with algae. The solution, if you only have access to white barrels, is to paint it. There is a paint product called Krylon Fusion that is designed to adhere to the side of HDPE plastic, and we have a program at the district where we have kids paint barrels and then sell them. So you can make them look really nice. You can also put plants on the top of them so the plants shade it out and grow down the sides. You can I've seen people put like the same siding, if they had wood siding on their house, the same siding on the side of a barrel, so it just kind of matches the house. There's all kinds of creative ways you can disguise it while also keeping sunlight out of the barrels. So when it comes to rain barrels, there are two ways to hook them all together. And you can see them. Does my mouse show up? Does my mouse show up?
Move it a little bit more, Derek. No, I can't see it, but there is a little arrow function.
Annotate, right?
Yes.
Mouse. Is that working now?
No.
Okay.
Derek, from the top, from annotate, you should be able to grab a pointer from there.
Yeah, I'm there. I hit spotlight. Is it still not showing up?
Still not seeing it.
Anyways, it's okay. I can just describe it. So you can connect all the barrels. If you wanted to do a multi-barrel system to make the whole thing work together, so you're using all the barrels at once, there's two ways you can do it. You can connect them all at the top, as you see on, well, actually the one on the bottom has both. So you can see that they've been strung together on the top and they've been strung together on the bottom. I pretty much always now recommend that people do it on the bottom, because in order to get the water out, if you string them all together along the top, you have to put outlets on the bottom of every single barrel. And then every time you need to use a new barrel, you have to move the hose from one spigot to the other spigot to the other spigot. And if you connect them all to the bottom, you can fill the whole system and lower the whole system with one spigot. And that's really nice. The picture that you see on top is one that we did at Arlington High School for their greenhouse, where we put a whole bunch of rain barrels in and we connected them all on the bottom. And that spigot that you see sticking out on the left side is the only spigot for the whole system. So everything fills up, and then when they want to get the water out, they just open the spigot and then they can use the water all together.
Derek, there's a question about what about chemicals leaching from asphalt shingles?
Yes, so I'll just address that now. So in terms of surfaces that are safe to use for stormwater harvesting, there is a hierarchy. The safest are metal or PVC roofs, some kind of inert liner typically. Below that is composite roofing. And then the worst is shake roofing, because they usually treat the like cedar shakes with some pretty nasty stuff in order to keep it from rotting. So yeah, an asphalt composite it does leach trace amounts of hydrocarbons. It does it worse if it's a new roof or if it's a really old roof. And so this comes down to people need to figure out what their intended use is for the stormwater and then make appropriate adjustments to that. And I actually have a slide where I think we're going to address this later in terms of what is the water safe for and what is the water not safe for. But we'll get to that. But yes, if you do have asphalt composite roof shingles, it doesn't mean that you can't do anything, but it does mean that there are certain things that you need to think about, and you may change your intended use on what you were hoping to do with it.
The follow-up to that question is they heard that asphalt has copper in it.
Yeah, some of those do have copper entrained in it. The amounts are incredibly trace. They're very, very, very small. And it's actually fairly easy to filter out. But yeah, I'll get into that a bit. There's actually a really good article. It's fairly old now that Sightline Institute put out from some research that was done in Australia. Most of the new technology that comes out in stormwater harvesting comes from Australia because they're really desperate for water. And they've mandated stormwater harvesting in a huge number of their areas. And they did a test in terms of how many chemicals are coming off of roofs and what can you do in order to mitigate for that. And it turns out that while there are things coming off the roof, they're very trace, they're very small, and they're not that difficult to remove if you have some type of basic filtration. I will say I don't recommend that anybody just go to their rain barrel and drink whatever's in there. If you are going to use this for some kind of potable use, which people do, people on San Juan Islands have to do this, where they only drink the water that comes out of the sky because they can't do wells because there's saltwater intrusion. You basically just need a high-end filtration system similar to what you'd have on a well. So, I mean, honestly, in terms of chemicals, chemicals that come out of most wells are way higher concentration than what's going to come off of your roof. And so you just have to do the appropriate filtration in order to use it for potable use if you do want to do that.
Thanks, Eric. And I want to say, based on your picture that you have on the screen right now, the question is, for gravity-based systems, do you need to elevate the barrels?
Yes. So yeah, the more elevation you get, the faster the water comes out. And so there's all kinds of clever ways of stacking barrels. This is one that I thought was interesting. They kind of took a wine racking method and used it for water, which is really space efficient. So that's a very clever way to do it. I always liked this system. Let's move on to Guzzlers. So, like I mentioned earlier, was there another question?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Yep. A guzzler is just an artificial roof with a cistern or a barrel attached to it. And it's used in places that are really remote to get water where you need water. So this is a clever little one that somebody put in. These are more common. This would be like in like Wyoming or Texas, I think, where they need water for livestock, way out in the middle of nowhere. Just it's not always terribly common. I don't see too many people using this application, but again, because this is for this class is for agricultural applications, it's important that people are aware that this idea exists. It's really not very difficult to do. It's nice because you can make the roof low to the ground because you don't have to live underneath it, or you can make it a shelter for animals. And this can be as simple as, plywood with a tarp over the top of it, or you can use metal roofing or basically any kind of impervious area that will collect the water, and then some way of transporting it to some type of cistern so that whatever you need it for, you can use it. Here's another couple of examples of different guzzlers that people came up with. All right, before we get more into the nitty gritty Are there any questions on any of the three of those specifically? Give you a second.
There was a comment about the stacking on the side. You can't collect water from the top. How would the water get in if they're stacked that way?
Well, so they have these hoses that connect them that are watertight to go all the way down. So they fill the top one, and then the water just goes from one to the other, to the other, to the other.
Cool. Thank you.
There are systems where you have to put some type of vent in. A tote system. There are one thing that we're moving to more and more at the district is using what's called IBC shipping totes. And they're these big crates. You've probably seen them. They've got a metal cage around them. They're a white plastic box. They're by far one of the cheapest way of doing stormwater harvesting. And they're nice because you can stack them. But if you stack them, you have to vent them because air has to get in while you're bringing water out. Otherwise, the whole thing will crush itself. So one way we do that is we just install a pipe at the bottom that's a riser, and then it has a U downturn up the top that's the same elevation as the top of the tote, so that air can get into the system as you empty it. So in a system like this with these barrels, you may have to have some kind of vent system in order to get it to work, so that the air can get out at the same rate that the air can get in at the same water that water's coming out.
Derek, will you go into attaching rain barrels at some point?
Yes. Yeah, we'll cover the details of that. So, yeah, more specifically, if you are going to put up some type of system, you have to figure out where the water goes now and how you're going to interrupt that. Most people put these systems on downspouts because it's really, really easy to just put the barrels or the cistern right up against the wall of your house. And then you can just use, most commonly, there's these accordion downspout things that stretch out and stretch in. And so you can connect that to the bottom of where your downspout comes out and then stretch it over using the accordion system and then put it down into your barrel. That's mostly what most people end up doing. If you use our rain barrel system, we usually just there's a lip around the top of the barrel, and we usually just have people cut their downspout at the same elevation of the barrel and then pull the downspout over the lip of that barrel so that it goes down into the barrel. One other thing that you're going to have to figure out is how much water actually comes into the barrel system. And the thing is, especially in Western Washington, we get so much rain that a very small roof will produce a very large amount of water. So in theory, 1 inch of rain will collect about 550 gallons of water, which is 10 barrels of water in just one rain event of 1 inch. Because we have some evaporative forces, so the rain hits the roof and some of it evaporates back up into the atmosphere. It's actually closer to about 200 or 470 gallons, but it's still a ton of water in 1 inch of rain. And we get in our area between 35 and 40 inches of rain every year. So, that's just a ton of water that's coming off of your roof. That would be for 1,000 square foot roof, which is typical for most houses. That's probably about the average size of a roof. So even if you only have a shed that's 100 square feet in surface area on the top, it'll collect a ton of water and it'll start filling your barrels really, really fast. Usually the limiting factor when it comes to stormwater harvesting is not the size of the roof. It's almost always the size of volume that you have for storing water. So generally that's why people start going bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger when they get that one rain barrel, is that they realize that their bottleneck is the volume of water that they have to store, not the size of their roof. So figuring out where to put your system is really important. You need, again, the whole system should be as closed as possible to keep mosquitoes and sunlight out. Every system needs a barrel or a tank of some kind, some type of way to get water from the roof into the barrel. Sturdy level base, that's pretty important. I'll talk about that one now. Because these barrels get incredibly heavy when they're full of water, like 600-700 pounds. So you do need something that you can put your rain barrels on so it's not going to tip over. So gravel pad, concrete blocks, bricks. I've seen people use wood round, something that's level and firm, so that if your system is end up being, if you're using totes that could even be, 2,000 pounds, that the whole thing doesn't end up tipping over one way or another, because it's so heavy. For a while, when I first started this, there was a rumor going around that people should strap their barrels to the side of their house in case of an earthquake, and that is a terrible idea. It is so heavy that it will just rip the siding right off the side of your house. If the barrel is going to fall, just let it fall. Don't try and prevent it from falling. It's not that big of a deal. The only issue would be if you really had it elevated high, like 15 feet, and then fell over. I could see how that would cause some damage, but that's not what most people are doing. Most people just have it, a couple feet off the ground, and if it falls over, it's not that big of a deal. It needs some kind of inlet with a screen. So this is important. We'll cover this in a bit. Because there is debris that comes off of your roof, you need a way of getting most of the big stuff out before it goes into your barrel system. You need some kind of spigot or outlet. You need some type of emergency overflow because, again, the roof area produces way more water than the volume of what you have. So you need somewhere safe for that water to go when the system's full. And then you need a way to clean out the system. So we're going to go through each one of these. Oh, wait. We'll go through each one of these in a bit. I'm going to cover. So this is one that I've been touching on a little bit in terms of what is the water safe for. Lawn and landscaping, definitely. There's very little risk at all that you're going to do any damage using collected stormwater for watering gardens. Like it's just not like there's not anything that's going to happen. Edible plants start to get a little interesting. I'll again reference that study that came out of Australia that said soil does a very, very good job of removing pollutants from water. Like it just does a fantastic job. So as long as you're watering the soil and not the plant, it's a lot safer. You also have to keep in mind that a lot of the fear around pollutants off of the roof, I personally think it is a bit over the top. It was something that happened because as people were starting to do this more and more, lawyers got involved in terms of what's safe, what's not safe. I've always thought if you asked a lawyer if you could eat something that grew in dirt, they would tell you no, that's not safe. Don't eat anything that grows in dirt. Dirt is full of pollutants, which is true. But the plants have a very, very impressive system, and the soil have a very impressive system of removing things. So with that being said, there is a hierarchy of what's the safest things to eat and what are the least safest things to eat. The least safe things are root vegetables because they have the most contact in terms of water doesn't have to, the pollutants from the water doesn't have to go very far in order to get into the root system. Next would be leaves, and then finally would be fruit, because fruit, there's really just a very complicated, sophisticated filtration system that any pollutants have to go through in order to get all the way through the plant and into the fruit. It just doesn't happen very much. So as far as they could test, and they put some pretty heavy loads of pollution into their tests. It just was not ever showing up in the fruit, and it really didn't show up in the leaves at all. The only time that they could get anything to show up in terms of a concern was in the root vegetables. But even then, it was very, very trace amounts. Livestock and pets, again, it comes down to what you're comfortable with. I tell people, look at the mud puddles that your pets drink out of, and I guarantee they're more dirty than what's coming off of your roof. Like if you're taking your dog for a walk and it's taking a drink out of something off the asphalt, that is a way, way dirtier source than anything that's coming off of your roof. But again, it depends on your comfort level. If you're really concerned about it, put on a metal roof or put on a roof with some kind of PVC liner, because those are really inert, and the water is going to be pretty darn clean. And then human consumption, we cannot tell people just to drink water straight out of a cistern for obvious reasons. It's not considered potable legally until you put it through some type of filtration system. So if you are trying to move to a point where you are off the grid completely and you're not relying on municipal water and you do want to drink the water, that you store on site, you need some kind of sophisticated pump and filtration system. But again, it's not that much different than what currently exists for most wells. So debris filters, you do need some way of collecting water or filtering the water, basic filtration as it comes down your downspout, and to keep your tank from filling with all kinds of leaves and debris and that type of thing. The picture on the left is a $4 Home Depot special with, it's just it's sheet metal box with a screen in it. And the one on the right is a German engineered model that sells for $200. There's everything in between. So obviously the German model does a really, really good job of filtering stuff out. And it's self-cleaning, so you don't have to ever think about it. The system on the left requires a little bit more maintenance, and it just doesn't filter as much. So do some of your own research. I'm available to answer those questions in terms of what level you need. The barrels that we sell, we just cover the top in window screening. We use aluminum window screening. The holes are so small that mosquitoes can't get in, and it takes out most of the stuff that comes off of a roof in terms of larger chunks. It gets rid of needles. It gets rid of any aggregate that could be coming down from the roof. And that is something that needs to be watched with your barrel. If you have a house that's right next to a bunch of trees, you may have to go out and clean your filter more often than if you don't have any trees next to your house. Again, I mentioned potable filters. Usually this requires some type of three-phase filtration system, which is what you see on the right. And there's all sorts of different ways to connect these together. Really not much different than what you see in a typical well house. UV disinfection is really common among stormwater harvesting, and that's come down in price a lot compared to what it used to be. All this stuff in general has come down a lot in price over the 10 years that I've been making these presentations. So things that used to be beyond people in terms of what they could afford are starting to become more and more affordable, just because the technology's come along enough and we're better at producing these type of things. It just does take some thought to design if you want to do a potable system. I will say, oh yeah, go ahead.
There's kind of a question about whether someone was saying that the rain barrel with a wire top wasn't barely collecting any water. And I have to think if it's possible that maybe it's just sitting in the middle of a field, because I'm thinking that these barrels need to be connected to the house or to some sort of catchment, being a roof or what have you. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's just having an open barrel sitting out doesn't collect very much water at all. Ideally, you would connect it to some type of roof. Just because the square footage or the surface area of an open barrel is very small, and there's just not that much water that falls through. So if you do have something in an open field and you're not getting enough water in the system, you need to put some kind of guzzler or something on there in order to make it work. Back to the filter thing, there is a guy located in Snohomish, Rainbank is the name of his company, and he specializes in these type of potable filter systems. So he does the really large systems. He works with those people in the San Juans that have no option other than to use water that falls out of the sky for their entire water source. So there are people that specialize in designing these higher end filter systems. So this is the picture on the left is the system that we use to for our rain barrels that we build. We just put a piece of window screen down and put screws on the top. And the one on the right is that accordion thing that I was talking about. However, in this picture, you'll notice that they just directly connected it to the barrel without any type of filtration. And that means the barrel probably will end up filling with sediment at some point. So if you do use that accordion system, make sure that you have some type of filter upstream of it or downstream of it.
So Derek, another question came in about where one could order for a reasonable price the larger plastic holding tanks you mentioned that are around.
So they're called IBC totes, T-O-T-E. You usually have to do some Craigslist shopping. So we have some sources that we have found, and now so we have a fairly steady supply of about 60 or 70 a year, and we do sell those to people that have really good applications for them. But the most consistent sources I've found have been distilleries, because they use them for pretty much all of their product, and they don't have a use for them. So they're pretty actively trying to get rid of them all the time. Any place that does any type of food processing is going to have those, though. So it's just getting on Craigslist, snooping around, doing some research, trying to find them. A good price on one of those is $50. A high price is anything over $100. If you're in the $75, $80 range, just do it, because you're probably not going to find too much better than that. Yeah, and ask a couple questions about what it was used for before you go pick it up. There are becoming more and more places that are specializing in selling these types of recycled products. So you might be able to just find one if you do a Google search. This is the filter. This is the filter on the system at Arlington High School. And you can see it's just got some needles on the top. So all I had to do was walk over and just use my hand to brush that away, and then it was fine again. So it wasn't flowing as well as it should have been, but I just showed up, and it took me 20 seconds to clear it off. You need a way of getting water out of the system. We like to use quarter turn ball valves with our system. And that is because, so most of these, like a gate valve where you have to keep turning and turning and turning, the reason that exists is because you're using a pressurized system. These systems are not pressurized, they're just gravity. So usually you don't need a gate valve of any kind, and it's much easier to just have a ball valve that you can turn on with a quarter turn and then turn back off again. You have to figure out a way to perforate the bottom of these barrels. We have an entire system that we developed in order to do that, involving a pipe tap and a drill. There is a video online. If you just do a Google search for Snohomish rain barrel, it's the first one that comes up, that will walk you all the way through the process of building your own rain barrel system. Usually as part of this class, we actually have an event afterwards where we would have a bunch of you attending come to a class, and you would all learn how to build your own rain barrel. We couldn't do that this year, obviously. So I'm instead recommending that video. And I think there's a link at the end of this. But if you, again, just do a YouTube search for Snohomish rain barrel, it's the first one that comes up. Yeah.
Derek, I put the link in the chat for that. And then there's a couple questions. One, does sunlight degrade plastic for the barrels? So what's the lifespan of a rain barrel?
The ones that we use, so they're 3/8 inch HDPE, which means they're pretty much bulletproof. I mean, I've found these barrels out in the woods that have clearly been there for 20 years, and they're just as sturdy as the day that they were made. These are made out of some of the most resilient plastic ever, which, not a great thing for our environment, but if they already exist, you might as well use them for a more environmentally friendly way of doing it. There are some plastics that will degrade over time due to UV exposure. These are not those barrels. So
the other question, when you're just talking about how do you get the water out, is Brian says, my valves freeze and break in the winter. What do you recommend?
Thank you. So we're spoiled in Snohomish County, and that we don't freeze hard enough to freeze an entire system usually. However, that's not to say that's not true for everybody. I mean, the easy solution is to just empty your barrels in the winter and then start collecting water again in the spring when the rain starts. There's usually plenty, even in most places, there's plenty of rain through the beginning of spring to fill these barrels up completely. And most of these systems we found will last a day or two in a hard freeze. It's really, if it's, more than that, the whole system will freeze up and everything will start to break in terms of pipes. I do recommend, I mean, you can always use a higher grade of PVC. One of the nice things, again, is the fact that these systems are not pressurized, so they don't freeze and break to the same extent as a municipal pressurized system would. So they tend to have a little bit more flex in them than you would if you were taking pressure out of the tap. So you could always use a Schedule 80 PVC pipe connection, and that could help it. But mostly I just tell people, if it's going to be a hard freeze, just empty the system out and start collecting again in the spring.
So it's a few more.
I very rarely have issues with the barrels freezing. I don't think I've ever seen a barrel freeze all the way through. I know it can happen. I mean, I've talked to Canadians who've talked about their entire system freezing over, but it takes a couple of days because it takes a lot of energy to freeze that much water. It's just the valves and the pipes coming out of it that are more susceptible. You can also try insulating the connections, and that might help.
So we have a few more questions, Jared.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how long can you store water? Can you do that indefinitely?
Yeah, you can do it indefinitely. I mean, eventually all of the oxygen works its way out of the system, which is not the best for plants, but it's not going to hurt anything. Yeah, as long, I mean, yes, I've had water in some of my barrels that have been there all winter, and I didn't really start using them until the summer, and the water comes out surprisingly clear, especially these blue barrels, just because the most common way these things get contaminated is with algae, and if you have a tight system that won't let sunlight in, that's just not going to happen. So no, there's not really a downside to storing water for a really, really long time, other than, I mean, there may be some bacterial growth and stuff over time, but there's just not enough nutrients in the water to really make the water really stagnant and gross.
So you wouldn't, would you use bleach to control that? Or
you can do that. I do recommend that people clean their system once a year. I usually just use a shop vac. So I empty the whole system and I take the shop vac and I stick it down in the hole and I just suck it out a couple of times. If you're really worried about it, you could always just put a bleach tab in it to kill the bacteria or anything that's living in there. Yeah, again, like, I'm not recommending that people drink this. So that's the biggest concern. And if you are worried about livestock, some type of chlorine tab or something like that might help in order to clean the water up if that's something you're really worried about.
So just
for the most part, the water stays pretty clean in there.
Yeah. So then to the photo you have on the screen, there's a couple questions. How many gallons is that cistern we're seeing?
That one is, I think that's 200. So that's still pretty small. I usually recommend, if somebody's going to be serious about this, that they start at the 800 to 1,000 gallon range. I highly recommend that you go to tankdepot.com. That's where it's also, I think it used to be called Plastic Mart, and then Tank Depot bought it, but you can still get there by searching for Plastic Mart. And they have all the different tank varieties that are out there, and there's a ton of them. And you can just spend all day shopping. One thing I will say, if you're going to buy a larger tank, is that the shipping cost is often can be as much as the purchase cost because they're really big. So sometimes it's worth finding one that's manufactured close to you, and because the shipping costs are so much less than shipping it like from Texas or something like that. So there is a company called Norwesco, Norwesco. They make tanks. They're located in Vancouver, Washington, and I think they just opened a new plant a little closer to us, maybe Olympia area. And I usually recommend that people buy from them. Their tanks are a little bit more expensive when you're looking at the sticker price, but then when you factor in the shipping cost, they're almost always cheaper.
That's awesome. And then one last question. Please explain the need to aerate the bottom of the barrel.
The need to aerate the bottom of the barrel?
Yeah. Maybe it's just how you have the downspout or the I can't think myself.
Overflow.
Anyway, that you have the air at the top, but then you open it up at the bottom. So maybe that's what she's talking
right.
about.
Yeah, so you have to have a spigot at the bottom to get the water out, the stored water out, And then you have to have, so in this picture, you can't see the spigot on the tank. So the spigot's probably over on the side somewhere. So you need a spigot on the bottom so that you can use the stored water, and then you need an overflow on the top so that any extra water can leave the system safely. So that's what I'm showing right now is the water is the overflows on the top. So the water can leave the system safely, and then you also need a spigot on the bottom to use the water. We covered multi-containers already. Again, we also have a video online similar to the one that we have on how to build one rain barrel that'll show you how to hook a bunch of rain barrels together. So again, if you do Snohomish rain barrel search on YouTube, I think it's the second video that comes up. We covered this already a little bit. System maintenance, rinsing your system, monitoring the inflows and outflows, making sure everything's flowing okay, maintaining your roof and gutters so that you don't get a bunch of debris in the tanks all the time, trimming and removing plants that overhang your house, checking to make sure that everything's tight in terms of cover, and then we talked about preventing ice damage already. There are a whole bunch of really cool little gadgets that you can use. This is a system that works in cooperation with the municipal water system. So you would plumb everything to the tank, and then this valve on the inside notices when the water is really low and then refills the tank with municipal water. So most of the water you're using comes off of your roof, but if you ever get to the point where you just don't have enough water in the system, this will kick on a valve that will fill the tank back up just using water from your house. So that's so that people don't accidentally burn out pumps because they're trying to pump from a tank that's empty. If you are looking at doing some type of pump, one, because your house is just located in a lower spot than where you want the water, or you're doing a below ground tank, or you just want more pressure where you're using it. Most commonly, we use what's called a jet pump or a shallow, it's actually a shallow well jet pump. And it's just a well pump that's designed to pull from fairly shallow wells. And that's basically what you're creating artificially when you put in a cistern is a shallow well on your property. These can be really nice systems that you can, put on wheels. The whole thing's just contained. You can either run it off of gas or you can plug them in. They sell electric versions too, and just use it to move water all over your property. This is a product we've had a lot of success with. I've been really, really happy with it to the point that we've purchased probably 10 of these total and then given them to or sold them to different at cost to different homeowners that have put their systems in. It's a really simple sprinkler pump. It's made really well. It comes with its own hose fittings, adapters already. And basically you just connect one end of this to your tank. You connect a hose to the other one. You plug it in. It just uses a standard 110 outlet and you turn it on and it sprays water all over the place at a really good pressure. It's fairly inexpensive. I think it's like $150. If you do have some debris or leaves or stuff in the water, it'll pass it no problem. It won't plug anything up. It's really been it's designed for farmers to pump out of great big ponds. So anything that would be in a pond, this can handle, which is pretty significant. There's a whole bunch of gauges that are available that will tell you how full your tank is. Most of them are pretty simple. It's just a float on the end with some numbers on the top that tell you where the water level's at. Using collected rainwater. This is a system I have at my house for a while where I just put in some drip emitters at the bottom of it. So the barrel fills in a rainstorm and then it very, very slowly over 2 weeks drips out. And you can't use a typical drip emitter that you would use for most gardening practices because those are designed for pressurized system. But because you're not pressurized, it doesn't work. But they do sell these adjustable rate emitters. They're called strawberries, and you just click them. They have a series of clicks, and you click it until you get the drip rate that you want, and then you leave it. It is a little fiddly. I used to have to come out every 2 weeks or so and adjust the rate. And sometimes it would get a little bit of sediment in there. So I'd undo it and clean it out and then screw it back in. But it was a lot of fun to play with. And if you are the type of gardener that likes to be a little bit fiddly and dial things in, this is a fun way to do that. So I had it just up on my deck. I just had a hose connection. I used a floor flange that I screwed up into the bottom of my gutter, and then had a garden hose that came down into the tank, and then from there I had the drip emitters that came out the side. I didn't have any kind of filtration system on this, but this section of the roof is very, very clean. I very rarely get any sediment coming through it. So it wasn't much of an issue for me. I wasn't as worried about the sediment in the barrel. We covered this already. This is more from a legalese perspective. Just so you know, I didn't tell any of you it's okay. I just told you what the risks are. So, hold on a second, my kids. Close the door. We covered this one already too. This is a system that we put in at a high school a couple of years ago that collects water off of an existing hoop house. Hoop houses are notoriously difficult because they need water on the inside, but they're also designed to keep water out. And because they're arched like that, it's always been very difficult to install a gutter system on them. This is a model that we use that came out of the University of Iowa, where they basically put 2x4 backing along the inside of the hoop house, and then they installed a gutter along the outside of the hoop house. And in order to get water from the hoop house into that, we had to put some kind of PVC or a plastic liner so that it caught the water and then filtered it into the gutter. That was the big part that we had. That was one of the hard things to figure out, because otherwise the water was just sheeting underneath the gutter. This one works pretty well. This is a terrible video that I took a couple of years ago using that sprinkler pump that I was talking to you guys about. And you can see it comes out at a pretty good rate. It does pretty well, considering that it's just a cheap $150 pump. It sprays a pretty good distance. He was able to get that probably 40 feet. So that's a really nice way to use that water. And again, just a fun thing to do with a hoop house, so they could use the water that they were missing inside of the hoop house. There's Kari sent this out already, but this is our video on how to build a rain barrel that we made a couple of years ago. All right, I think that's it. We've got about a half an hour for all kinds of questions, so feel free to just bring in anything that I didn't feel like I covered.
Yeah, I'm just going to start from the top real quick, Derek. Do you have a suggestion for mesh size for filtering, for feeding, or watering for chickens?
Yeah, so I mean, we just use the standard window screen mesh. Okay. And that seems to work really well. That seems to be a good size for everything. It lets water through fast enough. It doesn't plug up too easy. It keeps mosquitoes out. It's easy to work with. It's really cheap. You can buy a huge roll for $8 or something like that and use it forever. So, and I would get the aluminum stuff, not the nylon stuff. The aluminum stuff's a lot easier to work with because it's semi-rigid and you can kind of get it to make whatever shape you want, whereas the nylon stuff is really a fabric. So.
Great. The best way to get a lower rain barrel to a higher greenhouse is going to be a pump, correct?
Probably, yeah, unless you want to really elevate the rain barrel.
Right, depending on that disparity between.
Or find a source of a roof or something like that that's uphill of where you want it, and just put your barrel in a different location. But yeah, usually most people end up using a pump.
This gentleman is referencing someone else's recommendation, but elevating the cistern and using a small pump to fill the cistern. Gravity provides your on-demand water pressure. This setup should require less expensive pumps and less expensive electricity than pumping for water pressure. Thoughts on that type of setup?
No, for sure. I've seen people use, I mean, for the most part, people are only at the most trying to lift the water 10 to 12 feet at the most. And so honestly, they sell like fountain pumps for like $20, just a little tiny fountain pump. And if you had a sump of some kind and a float system, you could hook it up so that a little tiny $20 fountain pump could just trickle feed an existing cistern. So yeah, no, that can totally work. If you want to do this cheap, you absolutely can do it cheap. I cannot recommend YouTube enough for this type of thing. There are literally hundreds of videos of people doing different setups in different ways in different locations. Just get on there and do a search for rainwater harvesting or rain barrels or something like that, one of the keywords. And there's just page after page after page of different people doing very creative different things to make the system work. So yeah, and you can do it for really cheap.
Great. And then what are the best recommended or the types of screws we use for attaching the mesh screen to the barrel?
Yeah, we use a 1/2-inch pan head. I think it's a number 8.
Taylor just confirmed. Yes. I don't really see any more questions from folks. We will be having the presentation. Have access to the presentation slides. I think we're recording this, so you could always come back to this recording.
I can send you or Kari the presentation and you can post it somewhere.
I also posted the link to the WSU page because they uploaded them to their website. So all the handouts are there, including this class.
Perfect.
Sarah's dogs, they're so friendly. Let's see. Okay, there's another question. Thoughts or restrictions on using ponds for water catchment?
Yeah, so the issues with ponds are just the sunlight. They just constantly fill with algae unless you have some type of, you either have to control the number of nutrients going into them so that they don't fill with algae, or you just have to figure out how to deal with the algae. One common way of people deal with the algae is putting in an aeration system, because if you keep the dissolved oxygen content of the pond high enough, then the algae won't bloom. But that means you're paying money to keep the pond aerated. So short of that, you can, people using some kind of chemical treatment in their pond. Really, I mean, if you like the aesthetics of the pond, it's great. I try and stay away from ponds as often as I can, unless someone has a real drastic need for it. Like most of the time we're talking about ponds, I'm usually talking about, okay, you need like 50 to 100,000 gallons. That's usually when I go to the pond. Otherwise, it just ends up being so much maintenance for 3,000 or 4,000 gallons of water that it just doesn't really make it worth it. But again, if you're a fiddly gardener and you just love going out and playing with a pond all day and fighting with it and wrestling with it and getting it to do what you want, go for it. But yeah, I'm an engineer, so I tend to avoid super high maintenance things.
Great answer, Derek. What do you think about a diverter that are also overflows?
Yeah, like the Y, those can work. They just have to be watertight downstream of them all the way through. Yeah, I've seen those diverters work really, really well. Yeah, I don't have there. I've seen like 5 or 6 different models of them. I don't know that I've seen one in particular that works just so much better than the other ones. So I'd probably do some research and just buy the mid-range version of that. They're basically different Ys so that if the system gets full enough, it automatically diverts it, or it diverts a portion of the water. So yeah.
Nice. And then do really large cisterns have to be emptied and cleaned yearly also?
Again, it depends on what they're being used for and what your sediment load is. The nice thing about really large cisterns is they usually have a pretty significant sump distance at the bottom. So your outflow, and then there's some dead storage of water in the bottom, and that'll store quite a bit of sediment. And again, this water is just sitting there, so it doesn't have any agitation at all. So things just settle out over time. Even really, really fine particles will settle out. because the water is just sitting there. So no, I mean, if it makes you nervous, clean it out once a year. But just keep an eye on in terms of, I mean, I would recommend looking inside of it once a year. That's probably the best way to put it. Like pull the top off, look inside with a flashlight and see where everything's at. But yeah, it kind of all depends on your sediment load and what you're using it for.
Yeah, the use is important. Someone had asked, as in the San Juans, how do you hook up this for household use, excluding drinking?
Excluding drinking. So they have their entire system all in one. So usually they build the house over the top of giant cisterns. So they basically dig out a crawl space. They put in 20 to 40,000 gallons worth of tank. And then all of the stormwater runs into the tanks. There's well housing in the bottom that goes through a fairly intense filtration system, and then it plumbs it to the entire house. So the shower, the dishwasher, the sink, all that stuff all comes out of water that comes up because they're on a tiny island and there's literally no fresh water. They can't dig a well because it's all salt water all the way down. So the only way to live out there and the only way to get water is to get what comes out of the sky. So that's what they end up doing.
Yeah, and I know somebody who said they were from Hawaii and moved here too. I know that it's the same thing there on those islands as well. Here's another question about what are some good types of plants to put atop rain barrels for better aesthetics?
So anything that climbs, that sends out runners, strawberries, Connecticut would probably do okay. Anything that droops over the side that sends out runners. So something that spreads by rhizomes usually, because it's going to send those rhizomes out looking for more dirt, and that means growing its way down the side of your barrel.
Nice. I wanted to remind everybody that you can save the chat by clicking on the 3 little dots there because we've put in a lot of links. One question that was asked, and then Sarah put the answer in the chat, was whether or not when you're painting with a Krylon paint, do we do any special prep to get the paint to stick?
Yeah, it can. They do this press glaze on the outside of a lot of these barrels. And sometimes the paint does have a little bit of trouble sticking to that. So if you just take a orbital sander and run it once over the top of it, it roughens it up enough that the paint sticks a lot better. So alternatively, you can prime it. We've primed some of our barrels and that works well too.
Another question that Sarah typed in there too is, do we just email you if we want you out for a site visit?
Yeah, if you're in the county,
yeah,
yep, just there's my email right there.
And then if you're not in Snohomish County, you can go to betterground.org and we can put that link in the chat too. That is the regional Puget Sound conservation districts. And so there's a conservation district near you, wherever you live, you're surrounded by one. So that will help direct you to the right one. Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions? Feel free to put those in the chat, or at this point too, if you want to raise your hand, then you can just ask your question too for Derek.
All right. I think
we may be there.
Yeah. Cool. We get out a little bit early.
You can go play in the rain.
Yeah. All right. Go play around with the stuff that I just talked to you about. All right.
Perfect.
Well, thank you everybody so much. And yeah, and please reach out if you have further questions.
Thank you a lot. Really appreciate all the good information.
Thanks. Yeah, kudos in the chat. Thanks, Derek.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.
And then for this recording, I think WSU will be sending it out after the fact. So check with them to get the recording.
Yes. Now let's all go collect some water.
Yes. Have a good Saturday, Sarah and Derek and everybody else. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording and you have a great day.